Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all of you wonderful English 126 students. Today's lesson recording is a supplement to our in-class lesson. So hopefully we will be able to cover all of these materials during class time, but if we don't get to it all, I might ask that we finish up during homework time, either after class on Tuesday or some other time throughout the week. So let's see if this will be necessary as we're getting started. The agenda today is going over the viewpoint metaphor, which helps us to unpack our perspectives. We'll look at focusing and framing your topic, selecting a critical lens, and applying some filtering techniques. So all of this is very metaphorical, but as we get started, make sure that you do take the time to take notes. And during the in-class lesson, I'll invite everybody to share questions, comments, thoughts. If you have an idea that crops up after class, feel free to jump into this discussion space to share your questions and get more feedback. And for note takers, you might find that if you wanted to be a note taker, you might review the lesson. I will always try and remind us, don't feel pressured to copy everything down because every student has access to this. Instead, just try to capture some of the main ideas that you think are most important. Your judgment and your best guess about what seems important is perfectly valuable. And also, if you share your thoughts, your ideas, and your connections, those are valuable things to include in your notes. Also, as we get started, for everybody taking notes, not just our note-taking ambassadors, use the handouts that I'll give in class, or if you missed class, feel free to print the handouts that are attached in the Canvas page for this lesson. That way, as you're actively listening to the lesson, you can underline or highlight or add thoughts and details to those lesson slides instead of feeling the need to just copy down the vocabulary. With that all out of the way, let's get started talking about the viewpoint metaphor. So first of all, metaphor is a cognitive tool that helps us translate abstract and difficult concepts into an illustrated image that our minds can grasp onto. Concepts of thinking, understanding, and knowing are often illustrated with images of sight or eyes, and we can look at these terms like viewpoint, perspective, point of view, stance, angle, frame of reference, standpoint, etc. Do you see what I mean? Pun intended. So the term viewpoint, then, is much more than a synonym for the term opinion. The term viewpoint is a concept that really helps us to shape and express our opinions. Your viewpoint will play a major role in choosing the issues that are important to you, constructing the narrative or constructing the rhetoric of those issues from your point of view, and characterizing the ideologies, which is kind of a fancy way of saying the values, goals, and concerns that you have or that you think are important within that issue or topic. When we take the time to carefully develop our own point of view, it helps us to take responsibility for our own authentic and individualized thoughts. It helps us to practice empathy, openness, curiosity, and flexibility toward encountering other thoughts, other viewpoints within the context. It also helps us to understand how our views are situated within that larger context of opinions, assumptions, etc. The mission, then, to think deeply and compassionately about viewpoints, what we will be doing during this lesson. The mission to acknowledge and value divergent perspectives can help us really combat the dangers of egocentrism, sociocentrism, anthropocentrism, or any other kind of centralized thinking in general. Pause here for a moment and look back at your notes so far. We're just warming up to the idea of viewpoint. How does this concept raise questions about your essay topic? How does this concept maybe influence your understanding of the purpose and goal of writing project number 1? So of course in class we shared our thoughts. If you have more to add, you can pause the video and add here. Or also if you're absent, if you're not in class today, go ahead and take a moment to think about this, the idea of viewpoint. When we're ready to move on, we're going to look at framing and focusing our topic. Again, another kind of metaphor that helps us make a concrete approach to this abstract idea. So just like viewpoint was a metaphor, the concept of framing is also a metaphor that illustrates the choices we make within the rhetorical situation. So what are we going to say? How are we going to say it? What choices are we going to make in order to fulfill our purpose, in order to meet our goals? For why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about our opinions? For the context of project number 1, the reason why we're unpacking our own opinions first is to check in with where we stand, to evaluate our interests, desires, concerns, etc., before we conduct research to encounter other people's perspectives. So the frame of your topic will really help guide you to choose which issues and concerns you will focus on. It will help you to categorize your overall concept, break that into a really clear main topic, help you separate that overall concept, that main topic, into subtopics or points that you'd like to explore. And then it will help you break those subtopics into individualized details. Framing helps you, in other words, to define the scope of which subtopics you will include versus exclude. What will be in your frame, what will be left out of your frame. The focus of your topic will help you kind of define what this topic means to you specifically. In order to do that, it will help you to emphasize and amplify certain aspects within your topic that you care about. Focusing in on your view will also help you minimize and downplay certain aspects of your topic that you're not as interested in. There is no way for your viewpoint to exhaustively cover every single angle of your topic. That's not your job here. What is your job as a writer is to clearly frame and focus your project. What that means is kind of carve out the exact corner or corners that you wish to explore. Acknowledge the rest when you can, and guide your reader's attention toward your chosen interests. Let's pause again, just reflecting back on our notes, thinking about how we can use this idea of viewpoint, frame, focus to build upon the ideas that we've already started with our brainstorm and with our opinions. How have you so far been framing your topic? What have you been choosing to include or exclude? Which details have you been focusing on? In class, we're going to share about this, but if you're watching this video on your own, you may pause here. Think about your journal work that you've done so far. Think about these topics and share some of your ideas. When you're ready to move on, we're going to look at selecting critical lenses. So again, critical lenses is another metaphor that symbolizes a set of questions or concerns that each lens carries. So when we select a critical lens, it will help us frame, focus, and analyze the significance, analyze the context of our opinions. So some of us might already be familiar with critical lenses in general, such as gender and sexuality, race and ethnicity, class, which I prefer to speak about in terms of wealth and economics, environment and ecosystem. Semiotic and symbolic code is not as common, but the idea of like symbolic meaning is one of the major context lenses that we think about in the like humanities, liberal arts kind of education. In the context of English 126 specifically, so when we're looking at how DVC has arranged the purpose of this class, we're also asking students to think through these lenses: psychology, society, culture, politics, history, and aesthetics. Of course, there's a great deal of overlap between all of these terms. And in today's class, we are going to start taking a look. As we begin to scratch the surface of these lenses, let's keep these things in mind. Lenses help us frame and focus. When we're looking through a certain lens, some details and concerns will be amplified, while other details and concerns will be minimized or intentionally set out of focus or set aside for another time. Lenses are not mutually exclusive. There is a great deal of overlapping and combining several lenses at once. And lenses are not fixed. These thinking categories that we're going to think about today are constantly evolving and changing. We are always adding new questions, adding new concerns as real-world context continues to shift. Finally, I'd like to emphasize that lenses are not arguments. Lenses are a tool that help you develop meaningful analysis. Lenses are a tool that provide questions and concerns that really begin to help us answer the so what and who cares questions. It is up to us as thinkers and writers to apply those lenses effectively toward shaping our own argument. One way we can do this is with phrases like, when we look at this topic through the lens of economics and wealth, we begin to notice these details that you're going to analyze, patterns that you're recognizing, etc. It's up to you to decide whether you judge the outcome of that as like, these are some positive things we're noticing, or these are some problems we're noticing. The lens itself is not going to make that argument for you. It's going to give you a way to look at your topic and help lead you toward making your own argument in a focused way, if that makes sense. So yes, each of these lenses is complex, robust, and nuanced enough to constitute an entire course or an entire field of study. In this class, we need to be aware that we are only just beginning to engage with some of these large ideas. So we will by no means master or fully comprehend anything, honestly, anything about critical thinking that we get to in this class. English 126 is not the checkpoint, like after this class, I'm a master of critical thinking. It's kind of like after this class, the door is open for me to develop critical thinking. So let's jump in. Noting again, every student is going to have varying different interests for which lens they want to focus on. And we have 11 lenses to talk about. So we're going to use class time to just introduce the overall question, the overall focus of each lens. And then I'm going to ask that when you do your journal writing after class today, that you get these lesson notes back out and think about which lens you want to use. And at that time, think a little bit deeper for those deep thinking questions. So if you find yourself in the midst of journal, Unit 1 journal, selecting lenses for your viewpoint, and you find yourself here in this lesson, this would be a great place to maybe ask for more clarification, more guidance, etc. So if need be, pause here, and we're just going to jump right in. So first, let's take a look at gender and sexuality, the overall question. How do we construct and or express masculinity, femininity, androgyny within ideological frameworks? Ideological frameworks is another ambiguous term, and it means different things to different people. But basically, how do we code certain meanings to equal masculine, feminine, androgynous? How do we, as an ideological framework from our culture, how do we create normalized expectations for masculinity, femininity, androgyny, etc.? And this can be for social relationships, cultural power structures, aesthetic expressions, however it may be. And there are deeper thinking questions related to patriarchy or misogyny, gender identity, LGBTQIA experiences. So if that's something that's interesting to you, you will perhaps think about these terms, jump on the internet as you research, explore it more deeply. Next, we're going to move on to race and ethnicity. And the overall question is, how does race and racism continue to shape and organize our daily lives? So here's another more simplified way to say ideological frameworks. We can think about it as beliefs, ethics, politics surrounding identity, equality, justice, communication, aesthetics, etc. So many layers that are not even listed here that you guys can bring into your topics. Questions for a closer focus. How is the concept of race culturally constructed? I'm asking, like, how is it used to oppress and harm people? But I do acknowledge that we can also use the concept of race to uplift and celebrate people. And then we're looking at post-colonial ideas, and then also the concept of diaspora. So if those things are interesting to you as you develop your topic, come back and look at these more detailed focus areas. Maybe do a little bit of researching. Of course, come to support hours and we can talk about that more, etc. Moving on to the next one, we want to look at wealth and economics. So overall, how does capitalism structure our experiences of work and labor, industry and business, leisure and pastime? How do the values of capitalism influence another way of thinking about ideological frameworks, our social norms, and other cultural values? Looking closer, we can see, how does capitalism organize power in general? We can look at motivations and consequences for consumerism, the ethical implications of globalized consumerism. Next, we'll look at environment and ecology, where the overall question is, how do we conceptualize, characterize, and interact with our environment? Again, those ideas of what is our concept, how do we characterize it, how do we interact with it, these are all ways of understanding the umbrella term of ideological frameworks. What values or ideals are encompassed by all of those different ideological choices? Looking at a closer focus, we can pick apart the roles of human and non-human entities within the environment. We can look at concepts of responsibility, justice, and ethics in relation to environmental conditions. And also always thinking about the ecosystem and thinking about the ecology as both natural and man-made. Finally, for the overall general lenses, we have semiotics and symbolic codes. So basically, how do we use signs and symbols to construct layered codes of meaning, value, and ideology? And this one is a bit more abstract, so it can overlap with a lot of different topics, to look into symbolic codes and semiotics more closely. We can look at like the questions of shifting and expanding received codes to update and alter our symbolic representations for current day life. If we take a look at something in art, fashion, style, something in everyday culture, how does the symbolic expression of that reveal deeper layers of meaning? And then the impacts of like dominant representations versus subversive representations. What are the differences in their symbolic codes? So those were the basics. Those were kind of like the stereotypical lenses. I'd like us to pause here and notice how if we apply a critical lens to whatever we're thinking about, we can push our analysis toward deeper meaning, larger implications and consequences. So on the one hand, project number 1 is very much about what is my viewpoint, what is my opinion, but we do want to think about how our views and opinions imply deeper implications and larger consequences to the world around us. We can think about how these 5 lenses overlap and blend together for more complex analysis. So we can look at race and economics, race and environment, gender and semiotics, etc. Keeping in mind that we use lenses as a tool to aid our own independent thinking when we unpack the assumptions and unpack the consequences of our ideas. The lenses aren't doing any of this thinking for us. So when you apply a lens, that is an example of you using that tool to guide your own independent critical thinking. We can pause here too. If anybody wants to share the lens that they're sort of leaning to for their topic, that could be an interesting discussion. And then when we're ready to move on, we're going to talk about the 6 specific context lenses that DVC is asking us to really study. So firstly, psychology, the overall focus, kind of like the interactions between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. We can think about this as expressions and representations of the subconscious. Manifest meaning versus concealed meaning. So I like to think about this as like the surface layer of meaning versus the deeper meaning. We can also do this by analyzing intentions, impulses, and desires. There are a few more concepts to look at for psychology. So if these things are interesting to you, or if you have background in psychology from past education, this analysis tool might be interesting for you. Next, society. In general, it's kind of abstract, but one way that we can understand it is people's behaviors and interactions with one another and how they are shaped by habits, norms, expectations, and then also thinking about the different layers of individual behaviors and individual interactions as opposed to like institutionalized behaviors and interactions. There are some key concepts for deeper thinking. So if you have a topic that is sort of interested in social or society-based implications, you might spend some time looking through these. Furthermore, we have culture. So this could almost mean anything, but I feel like it's nicer to give it some detailed language. So culture kind of involves our ideological frameworks that surround family, religion, education, morality, language, and usually a culture or cultural norms, cultural ideologies are shaped by a sense of shared symbolism, shared meaning, shared values, and shared expectations. Some ways to dig deeper into the concepts of culture, looking at like formal elements of culture, like ceremonies and rituals, taboos. This is kind of like the counterpoint to norms and expectations. and counterculture. So what goes against the dominant ideology? What goes against the dominant representation? A lot of compare and contrast is possible here. Next, looking at politics. Of course, the overall focus of politics is power. How power is structured and enforced by ideologies. So, values, norms, expectations, judgments, etc., that maintain relationships of domination and subordination. So somebody has power and somebody does not. Somebody is in control and somebody is controlled. So when we think about politics, we think about power structures. Some key concepts for deeper thinking, biopolitics. So in the US especially, but in pretty much the whole developed world, power structures are deeply invested in how our government and governing bodies can control the bodies of the citizens. And then the power organizing principles, doctrines, and practices associated with capitalist power, racist or anti-racist organizations or principles, sexist or anti-sexist power struggles, colonialism, anti-colonialism, fascism, populism, neoliberalism, anthropocentrism even. So there's a lot to dig into and it's hard to put it on a slide, but here are some start points for thinking about politics and political power. It doesn't generally mean who you're voting for in that service level meaning of politics. It usually is something a little bit deeper. Next, we have history. So the concept of historical consequences, historical implications. So how do the contexts of history, present, and future influence the meaning and value of ideas, of behaviors, of relationships, of anything else on this list of lenses? So how does putting it in the context of past, present, future change the judgments, the opinions that we make? Key concepts for history: continuity and change, giving voice to repressed narratives, and leaning into the concept of futurity. And finally, we have aesthetics. The overall focus: how aesthetic experiences impact mood or state of mind, how aesthetic experiences leave a lasting impression on your attitudes, opinions, values, and judgments towards something. Some deeper questions, encoded meanings, so how style or appearance is coded for deeper meanings. And then aesthetic movements, so we can look at like the implicit commentary that is made by different aesthetic movements. I only listed a couple that came to mind. So like nostalgic trends, so like retro, vintage, antique type trends. They seem to have these values, beliefs, and judgments that idealize the past, which probably involves overlooking some of the ills of our past. There's the idea of like postmodern, posthuman, like after Earth, dystopian aesthetics. Again, they're kind of suggesting different value structures, different beliefs and judgments. Maximalism versus minimalism. Anything core, like cottagecore is the first thing that comes to mind, or like goblin core, themes like that. So unpacking the deeper layers of opinions and attitudes, values, judgments embedded in aesthetics. So pausing now, we have a lot of lenses that we've just sort of gleaned across. Of course, some of them overlap kind of nicely. So we might be choosing one or two or even three that we want to lean into this semester. I think it's absolutely unreasonable for any one student to feel obligated to try and like collect all 11 of these lenses. So take some time in your journal writing after this class meeting take some time to think about which lenses are going to be most interesting to you. Again, thinking about how you're going to use those lenses to help you unpack the assumptions and consequences of your ideas. Finally, the last topic is filtering your viewpoint. So just like our previous metaphors, the concept of filtering is another metaphor that helps us talk about the stylistic choices that we make about how we express our opinions and viewpoints. Stylized tone and language are rhetorical devices that influence how the audience will respond to your writing. The filter can significantly influence how you express your attitudes, your meanings, and the intentions of your opinions. So think about the differences between a progressive versus conservative filter or tone, an optimistic versus cynical, celebratory versus antagonistic. These different filters are going to express your bias, so to speak. Language is going to play a huge role in actually expressing the filter. So abstract words are going to make your attitudes and intentions very ambiguous, very vague. You're not going to express yourself clearly to the reader. Using some technical jargon can illustrate your expertise, but keep in mind that it could isolate some of your readers, so you may need follow-up explanation. Trendy buzzwords and cliches really might capture the reader's intention and get people sort of excited, but again, it can also make your viewpoint unclear. Euphemisms are another way of expression that we often fall into, and this comes when we might want to downplay uncomfortable topics or diminish the seriousness of your ideas. So I think if we're talking about something sensitive, if we're talking about something difficult, it's best when we find ourselves leaning toward euphemisms, it's best to try and overcome that and get to a direct and clear statement. And similarly, a little bit of metacognitive critique, metaphors and analogies can help to illustrate your meaning, but they're also kind of a shortcut that helps us avoid the difficulty of explicit understanding. So throughout this lesson, I've used a lot of metaphors and analogies to illustrate this critical thinking concept of the focus, frame, and filter of our lenses. But I've done my best to try and explain each metaphor along the way using clear, overt language. And that's kind of the key when it comes to all of these kinds of language choices, is making sure that we're using a little bit of our artistic, playful language, but then also including that clear, direct, overt language as much as possible. Overall, each choice that we make within the rhetorical situation, from how we frame and focus a topic, to the lenses we use for analysis, to the language we use to express our opinions, helps us to explore, develop, and communicate all the different layers of our unique viewpoints. After this lesson today, make sure that we do follow up by reading Chapter 4 selections from the textbook, and then writing your Unit 1 journal again, using lenses to focus and filter your viewpoint. Also, prepare for discussion leaders if you are one of our discussion leaders for this week. We'll use the rest of our class time to group chat, so check in to discuss how our ideas are taking shape, share from your brainstorm and opinion journals, respond to classmates to help expand those perspectives with more opinions or more perspectives to consider. And also maybe start unpacking those opinions in a little bit more detail by activating some course vocabulary from this lesson. So if you were in class today, then I hope that we made time and had enough time for you guys to speak with each other. If you have follow-up ideas, or if you are absent and you still want to get some connection, please go ahead and use the Canvas discussion area to respond. Otherwise, I will see you guys all the next time I see you. Bye.